The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne. Analysis of chapters. Chapter 1, The Prison Door. This opening chapter of the main narrative introduces several of the images and themes within the story to follow. These images will recur in several settings and serve as metaphors for the underlying conflict. In the manner that Hawthorne describes it, the prison embodies the unyielding severity of Puritan law, old, rusted, yet strong with an iron-clamped oaken door. Puritan law is coded, in this account, in the rust of tradition and obsolete purpose. But despite the evolution of society, the laws have not kept up. As a result, the door remains tightly shut and iron-clamped. It seems it will take a superhuman force to somehow weaken the mores that control the society in which our story will take place. With the reference to Anne Hutchinson, the prison also serves as a metaphor for the authority of the regime, which will not tolerate deviance from a prescribed set of standards, values, and morals. Hutchinson was a religious but freewheeling woman who disagreed with puritanical teachings, and as a result she was imprisoned in Boston and then banished. She eventually was a founder of Antinomian, Rhode Island. Hawthorne claims that it is possible that the beautiful rose bush growing directly at the prison door sprang from her footsteps. This implies that puritanical authoritarianism may be so rigid that it obliterates both freedom and beauty. The rose bush itself is an obvious symbol of passion and the wilderness, and it makes its most famous reappearance later when Pearl announces that she was made not by a father and mother, or by God, but rather was plucked from the rose bush. Roses appear several times in the course of the story, always symbolizing Hester's inability to control her passion and tame it so that she can assimilate to Puritan society. Pearl too was marked by this wildness. Hawthorne cleverly links the rose bush to the wilderness surrounding Boston, commenting that the bush may be a remnant of the former forest which covered the area. This is important, because it is only in the forest wilderness where the Puritans' laws fail to have any force. This is where Dimsdale can find freedom to confess in the dark, and it is where he and Hester can meet away from the eyes of those who would judge them. But the rose bush is close enough to the town center to suggest that the passionate wilderness, in the form of Hester Prynne, has been creeping into Boston. That the rose bush is in full bloom, meanwhile, suggests that Hester is at the peak of her passion, referring to the fact that she has given birth as a result of her adulterous affair. The narrator's comment that the rose may serve as a moral blossom in the story is therefore a note that Hester's child will provide the moral of the story. Chapter 2, The Marketplace. Here we are introduced to the Scarlet Letter, which has become eponymous with the novel itself. Its introduction carries a touch of humor or, at least, resistance. Hester has appropriated the supposed symbol of shame as a beautifully embroidered letter, which she wears without the slightest air of anguish or despair. Indeed, the fine stitchwork around the A has reduced it to an ornament, a decorative and trivial accessory. The community's reaction to Hester, as they watch her on the scaffold, not only gives us a sense of how unfavorably they view the crime, but also suggests that there might be a possibility for a groundswell of change. Most of the people watching Hester's punishment believe that it is far too lenient. Some say they would like to rip the letter right off her chest, others decry the failure of lawmakers to put Hester to death. Yet, there are a few who believe it is more than enough. As one bystander remarks, she feels every stitch in her chest. This scene is the first of 3 scaffold scenes in the novel. In this scene Hester is forced to suffer alone, facing first her past and then her present and future. The scene at once reveals Hester's past without presenting us the details of her crime, and it ends with the revelations of the consequence of this past. These were her realities, all else had vanished. Chapter 3, The Recognition. Roger Chillingworth is introduced here as Hester's husband, but because the story began in medias res, starting in the middle of the action, We did not see whatever early affection there might have been between Hester and Roger. Now, we cannot seem to find the slightest bit of emotion connecting them. Indeed, when Chillingworth appears while Hester is on the scaffold, she seems paralyzed by fear at first. And when Chillingworth demands aloud, "Speak, woman, speak and give your child a father," we suddenly understand just how distant husband and wife now are. We are still putting the pieces of the puzzle together at this point, and we are not sure what Chillingworth's relationship to Hester really is. Does he want her dead? Does he want the child for himself? Does he know who the adulterer is? Our first priority, as readers, is to determine whether Chillingworth is still in love with Hester. For her part, it seems plain enough that Hester has no carnal feelings remaining for her own husband. If there is irony implicit in the fact that Chillingworth is demanding Hester to give her child a father, since he should be the father of his wife's child, it is also ironic that Dimsdale, the actual father of Pearl, has to keep up his appearances as the town minister who is to try to make Hester confess the name of her child's father. She responds by telling him that she will bear both his and her shame, and that her child will never know her earthly father. Dimsdale then publicly admits defeat and ceases trying to make Hester tell him the name, leaving the crowd unsettled and leaving Chillingworth with a sore admission. Later in the novel, once we learn all the secrets that Hester is carrying, we look back at this scene with fond amusement, realizing that all of our main characters are holding back the truth with facades. Dimsdale places his hand over his heart in this scene. This gesture will reappear and grow in significance during the novel. In this chapter it is meant to show his distress in failing to confess his own part of the adulterous affair. At the same time, the gesture of the hand over the heart is the same one that Hester makes when she remembers the Scarlet Letter. Hawthorne brilliantly connects Hester's openly displayed shame with Dimsdale's secret shame by having both characters touch the spot where the Scarlet Letter is displayed. The Indian standing at the edge of the crowd introduces the division between the stark puritanical world and the wilderness beyond. Inside the city of Boston, the laws are upheld and morals are kept intact. But in this forest the laws no longer hold, and the Indian represents the savage and wild nature of the area outside of Boston. The Indian also foreshadows the dilemma facing Hester, who must find a way to simultaneously live with her immorality and coexist with the moral utopia within Boston. Chapter 4, The Interview. This chapter marks the second interrogation of Hester, and it foreshadows key moments of the novel. In addition, Roger Chillingworth's relationship to Hester, namely, the fact that they are married, is revealed here. There are two moments of foreshadowing during this chapter which require further analysis. The first occurs when Chillingworth says, "Thou wilt not reveal his name. Not the less is he mine. He bears no letter of infamy wrought into his garment, as thou dost, but I shall read it on his heart." The connection between the Scarlet Letter and the heart was already made in previous chapters, when Hester placed her hand on the letter and Dimsdale clutched his heart to hide his shame. Thus the reader can infer that his heart will somehow reveal Dimsdale's secret. This does in fact occur, as a result of Chillingworth feeling Dimsdale's heart while the Reverend is sleeping. The second moment of foreshadowing occurs in the last few sentences. Hester is afraid she has made a bond that will prove the ruin of her soul. Chillingworth replies with, "Not thy soul, no, not thine." Obviously the reference is to Dimsdale's soul. This prediction also appears later in the novel and seems to be coming true with the death of Dimsdale. It is difficult to establish what motivates Roger Chillingworth to remain and seek revenge. He is an educated man with superb skills in medicine and literature. Why then would he choose to remain in Boston and attempt to destroy Dimsdale? There are few good explanations for Chillingworth's behavior and desire to not be known. The most likely reasons are revenge and the challenge of solving the mystery. The motive of revenge is clear enough from Hester's infidelity and the damage that revealing himself would do to his reputation and future ability to marry. He also might seek vengeance on the true father for stealing his chance at a family. In that society, it would make sense to go after the father rather than Hester, and he admits in this chapter that he married Hester even though he knew she did not love him. Even so, Chillingworth could have left town and tried to start a new family elsewhere. But there is still the mystery. Chillingworth's behavior is too sublimely cruel for that to be the only motivation, so it seems that he is motivated both by revenge and the mystery. A third possibility is that Chillingworth is also trying to remove the father from the scene in order to make a second attempt to win Hester's heart. This idea seems unlikely, but it goes hand in hand with the acts of revenge Chillingworth carries out in his parasitic attack on Dimsdale, sucking the virility out of the man. As we continue our analysis, let us revisit these options to see whether the textual evidence supports them. Chapter 5, Hester at her needle. Why would Hester stay in Boston rather than start her life anew somewhere else? The narrator argues that it is very difficult to leave the scene of a grave event because one feels the need to indulge in the feelings brought about by the setting. In other words, once Hester is made to stand on the scaffold, she unconsciously believes she must remain in Boston until she is somehow purged of the consequences of her action. To leave Boston out of anger or the desire to banish her past could leave her unsettled for the rest of her life. The Scarlet Letter itself becomes an even weightier symbol in these chapters. Whereas at first it represented Hester's adultery and her needlework skills, it now takes on two more meanings. First, the letter begins to represent the hidden shame of the community. Preachers stop in the street and address their fiery words towards Hester, and she becomes a lightning rod for all sin, for all the latent build-up of repressed rage fomented by the strict morals and codes of the society. The more the community unloads its hatred and judgment upon Hester, the more it can use her as an example or deterrent in the name of eradicating sin. Hester also consents when people sympathize with her, perhaps because of their own secret sins. Thus the letter serves as a gateway into other people's secret crimes, and attacks as a focal point for the shame of the entire community. The letter thus can be interpreted as a symbol of shame shared by everyone rather than by Hester alone. The treatment of Hester worsens after she is displayed on the scaffolding. Her friends abandon her, and she must live in an isolated cottage on the outskirts of town. Even though Hester spends time helping to make clothes for the poor, they treat her badly in spite of her good intentions. She is not just an outcast, but also so low in the opinions of others that even children feel encouraged to make fun of her, even though they have not the faintest clue what she has done wrong. Probably they are too young to understand. That Hester chooses to live near the woods, on the border between forest and the town, is a clear and potent metaphor for her place in limbo between the spheres of the moral and immoral. Indeed, Hester seems to be trying to live in both worlds simultaneously, which results in her further degradation and the increasingly clear fact that she will have to make a choice. Either she must assimilate to Puritan tradition and follow their laws to the letter, or she can roam free and follow her passions and instincts while losing her connection to society. Her society barely tolerates someone living in the moral world while having an immoral action in one's past. Chapter 6, Pearl. Pearl is the living embodiment of her mother's sin. She is a child of passion, wild and unfettered, and as a result she becomes mesmerized by the scarlet letter that her mother must wear. Even before she can speak, she is grasping for it, as if she knows that this holds the secret of her birth, and that its power led to her own creation. Hester does not have the ability to tame her daughter, she simply gives in to the child's inner nature. What is suggested, then, is that as long as Hester herself remains unsure about the moral consequences of her affair, so long as she lives in limbo between passion and duty, we could say, she will never be able to control Pearl. But once she makes peace with her sin, Pearl may truly become her child, a child of love. In the meantime, however, Pearl seems very much an embodiment of unfettered id. She has no interest in playing with other children and can be violent towards them. She is not protective of her mother either. Psychoanalysts might identify Pearl as a manifestation of rage, an expression of the repressed love and passion that are silenced by puritanical society. After all, if Dimsdale and Hester still love each other, their love is quelled and silenced by law, while Hester's loveless marriage with Chillingworth is endorsed. Chapter 7, The Governor's Hall. This narrator does not go in for subtlety, he tends to state his themes quite plainly. In this chapter, particularly, we see the direct link between Pearl and the Scarlet Letter. The child's whole appearance was the Scarlet Letter in another form, the Scarlet Letter endowed with life. Pearl, after all, is consistently referred to as a little witch or elf child or a devil child because in all appearances, she was born without a father. As long as Hester refuses to name her father, Pearl will remain a child not only of sin but literally of black magic. Notice, then, how Pearl is the one to renew the urgency of naming her father, even more than Chillingworth. Pearl has the most at stake to ensure that her father's identity is revealed. Inside the mansion, Pearl looks around and sees the shiny metal of the governor's suit of armor. She then calls her mother's attention to the fact that the Scarlet Letter is grotesquely magnified by the convex shape of the armor, causing it to appear gigantic. It is a simple foretelling of the fact that in this house of law, this simple embroidered letter will be seen as the ultimate message of sin, perhaps so distorted in its significance that Pearl may lose her mother here after having lost her father. After all, Puritan laws have stripped her of her father, and now Bellingham will try to seize her from Hester as well. After Hester convinces Pearl to look at the garden, Pearl immediately demands a red rose. This scene harkens directly back to the first chapter, where Pearl and the rose blossoms become connected for the first time. The rose blossom serves as a moral blossom within the story. Pearl demands it as though she sees a link between morality and passion, and she may be the only one to believe in the possibility of reconciling both. Chapter 8, The Elf Child and the Minister. Much of this chapter is dedicated to drawing stronger parallels between Pearl, the Scarlet Letter, and the Red Rose. Thus Pearl is called a Red Rose by Wilson when he first sees her. Even stronger is Pearl's response to Wilson's question concerning who made her, when she says that she was plucked off the rose bush outside the prison door. For all its seeming flippancy and impertinence, Pearl's answer is remarkably astute. For if the bush represents the wildness of passion, then she was indeed plucked off of it as a result of her mother's affair with Dimsdale. The question remains, however, how this rose can be the moral blossom that Hawthorne promises early in the novel. Hester's appeal to Arthur Dimsdale marks a turning point in the novel. It is probably the first time she has relied on her relationship with the minister for support, and it makes the other men aware that Dimsdale knows Hester better than they thought. Dimsdale steps forward with his hand over his heart, again hiding the Scarlet Letter which he feels upon his breast. This also is related to Chillingworth's comment that he will recognize Pearl's true father by reading his heart. Dimsdale then correctly associates Pearl with the Scarlet Letter upon her mother's bosom, and he manages to keep the mother and daughter together. Pearl's response is unique at this juncture, taking the minister's hand and placing her cheek against it. This simple gesture is full of meaning, because it implies that Pearl recognizes Dimsdale as being connected to her. Dimsdale responds by kissing her on the forehead, in a sense claiming her as his own child. The scene in which Mistress Hibbins invites Hester into the wood to meet the black man largely acts to foreshadow events, emphasizing that the forest is an ungovernable, amoral wilderness. Thus, when Hester meets with Dimsdale later in the story, and when both seek redemption, They returned to the woods in the hope of finding truth outside the stringency of Puritan codes.